Hey guys, welcome to my channel. This is Jay from Coding with Jaybird, where I upload weekly tutorials to help build your confidence in coding. Today we're going to have a look at JavaScript events and event handlers. Let's start coding. Here you can see I've created an event handlers project folder, inside which I have an event handlers.html file, which is linked to the CSS style sheet and a main.js. I've also added an IMG folder with 4 images for the 4 seasons: fall, spring, summer, and winter. If you want to send an alert to the user when the user clicks on a button or hovers over an element, you can use an event handler to invoke a JavaScript function that then reacts to this user event. Event handling is made up of 3 steps. First, you want to select the element node that you want the script to respond to, so you're effectively getting the DOM node for that element. Secondly, you want to choose which event on the selected node will trigger the response, and this is where binding occurs. Lastly, you want to choose the code that will run when the event occurs. So you trigger a function when the event occurs on a specified element. Now, there are 3 ways to bind an event to an element. The first one is an HTML event handler. Now, this is a dated approach, but I will still be teaching it to you today. The second one is a traditional DOM event handler. And lastly is an event listener. Now, I'll cover the first 2 in today's tutorial. Stay tuned for part 17 of this video series, where I go over the ins and outs of event listeners. All right, so for the first one, which is called HTML event handlers, what I want to do is modify my HTML file. What I'll do is I'll start by creating an h1 tag with some instructions. Click on the image to see an alert using an HTML event handler. And what I want to do is I want to have an image just below this, and when the user clicks on that image, I want an alert to pop up. So I'll start by giving this an ID so that I can reference this later, of seasons-image, and I want to source the image to the image folder. Let's go inside the image folder, and let's grab the fall image. And let's not forget our alt tag. So I'll just say seasons. And for styling, let's give this a width of 400. All right, let's save this and see what we get. Okay, perfect. So we see our image. Now I want to be able to click on this image and have an alert pop up. So the way you do that with an HTML event handler is you actually bind it to an event right here in the HTML tag itself. So I'll say on click, run this JavaScript alert method and alert to the browser you clicked on the image. So when I click on this image, you can see, perfect, you get this alert. You clicked on the image. Now this is not the recommended way of event handling. In earlier versions of HTML, there were attributes that had the ability to respond to events on the element that they were attached to, just like I've displayed here. Now, this method of event handling is considered bad practice now and is no longer used. It's better practice to entirely separate the JavaScript code from the HTML code. And as you can see, it would get pretty messy if you had JavaScript sitting here in the HTML, and then you had your own separate JavaScript file with other JavaScript code. Keeping track of where you've done what would be tricky. So this is a dated approach, and we'd like to avoid using this going forward. The next approach is called traditional DOM event handlers. Now this is where you bind an event to an element using an event handler. Now you can only attach one function to each event handler, and it would look something like this. You would have an element dot on event, so the event that occurs on that element, equals some function name. Now, in order to demonstrate this, let's go back in our HTML and modify the code a bit. I'll add another tag here. So let's say an h2 tag that says click on the button to change the seasons. So I'll create a button tag next. We'll just call this change seasons. Now I've already applied some styling, so you can see this pretty red button shows up here. And what we want to do is we want some way of targeting this button. So let's give this an ID of seasons. And now in our main.js, we can then refer to that button by saying const, so we're creating a new variable, change image button equals document.getElementById. So we're basically grabbing that element by its ID and we're storing its reference in this new variable. And we want to grab the seasons. And we also want to grab the image itself. So let's say const seasons image equals document.getElementById. And we want to grab the seasons-img. So these two are simply this ID and this ID. Okay, so now that we've done that, let's see, what are we trying to achieve? Well, we want to create an on-click event on this button. So we can say change image button, because that's the element we want to bind the on-click event to, dot on-click equals some function. Now, what should we do inside this function? I want to be able to click on this button and change this fall image to winter. And if it was a winter image, I'd like to change it to spring. Spring image should change to summer. And if it was a summer image, it should change to fall, and so on. So how do we do that? Well, the ideal way would be to use a switch statement. So we can say switch, and we check for some condition in here, and then we'd have our different cases. So what are we checking for? Well, we're checking to see what is the source attribute of the image at the current moment. So seasons image dot get attribute, and we want to get the source attribute. And this will tell us the value of this image. Is it coming from the IMG folder as fall or winter or so on? So our first case, we'll check for the value of the source attribute of this image. Is the value set to img/fall.jpg? And if it is, we're going to do something in here. We'll get back to that in a minute. And then we need to break out of it so that we can go to our next case statement. And this time we're going to check for, does the source attribute of the image equal img/winter.jpg? If so, do something, and then again break out of here. And now let's check the last two seasons. And again, we'll break out of the spring case. And lastly, let's check the summer case. Okay, and we also want a default case. All right, so what do we want to do when the image equals a fall image? Well, in this initial state, it is fall. So after fall comes winter. So what we want to do is we want to set the new source attribute for the seasons image. So seasons image dot source equal to img winter.jpg, because we want fall to change to winter. And similarly, we want to do the same thing from winter to spring. So seasons image dot source equals img spring.jpg. And if it's spring, then we want to change it to summer. And now let's not forget the summer image. So if the current image happens to be summer, and then the user clicks on that button, we want to change the seasons image dot source attribute to equal img. What would it be next? It'd be fall.jpg. So what about the default now? Well, let's set it back to fall, because that's how the page loads. Seasons image dot source equals img fall. That way, if for some reason it doesn't meet any of these conditions, it'll reset itself back to fall. So let's save this and test this out. If we click on the image, we still get the alert. Perfect. And if I click on the change seasons button, it should change to winter. Perfect, it does. And if I click it again, it changes to spring. And if I change it again, back to summer. And one more click and back to fall. Yay, it works perfectly. Alright guys, that's it for today's video on event handlers. We've covered the first two ways to bind an event to an element. Stay tuned for part 17 of this video series, where I'll be covering event listeners. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button so I can continue to make more amazing coding videos for you in the weeks to come. Until next week, keep on coding!